Hello gorgeous people and welcome to Sparkle Tart. Today I'm going to show you how to use Lindy's Stamp Gang Magicals to colour in conjunction with watercolour paint and create a beautiful soft colour for a fabulous face. Now I've started with a sketch that I've done. You can see that this is something I've been working on, so I haven't recorded the process. There was much rubbing out. I'm using a bit more shading than usual as an underlayer, and I'm still working on this particular technique myself. So once I'm happy with how I'm sort of doing this, I'll share that technique with you as well. But today we're just going to be looking at the skin tones and then how to finish off the face. Come on, let's get started. So I've started my journal page with a layer of layer cake paints from Davenport. Now these are somewhere between wash, watercolour, but you can apply them really thickly, kind of like I've done here, and they're almost got qualities of acrylic. They're pretty awesome. They're really special, they're new, and they don't really perform like anything else, but I love the way they looked. So I've mixed mine up in a very washy kind of way and then added a couple of layers to darken up the background. This is just 3 colours. Now that it's all dry, I'm going to start adding paint to the face, and I'm going to start with a layer of watercolour paint, and it's a Jane Davenport watercolour called Buff. So this base colour for the face is just one of the Jane Davenport colours here. I think it's called Buff. And I'll just get my palette off to the side, paintbrush, some water, and I'm just going to apply a really light layer of Buff. Alright, so I've got it mixed really watery here, and I'm just going to apply this directly onto the dry paper. Now this is not watercolour paper, it's just mixed media paper. So you're not going to get quite the same effects as you would on watercolour paper. Now I have the moon as my kind of light source here, but because it's behind her, I sort of have a bit of opportunity to play and decide where I want my face lit. Alright, so I've got that base layer on here now for the skin. So what you can do while it's still wet, if you want to, is clean off the brush and just lift some of that colour up. Any areas that you would like it a little bit lighter. Now this watercolour is going directly onto paper. There's no gesso or anything else underneath. It is just the mixed media paper in this particular art journal. Now while it's still wet, I have some of my Lindy's colours from the Alexandra's Artists series. I've got Andrea's Azalea, Karen's Coral, Lara's Wild Mauve and Yana's Jade. Now again, I've just mixed these into a really watery consistency. They've got the azalea, the coral, the mauve and the jade, and I just need to put a bit more water in here. And then this colour in the middle, I've mixed the azalea, a little bit of the coral and a little bit of the mauve to make this sort of really pretty, deeper pinky kind of colour. Let me just rehydrate these a bit because I took them out and tested them before to make sure that the colours were right. And I'm just going to blend these in with what I've already got. So this is my little colour tests. This is the azalea, the coral, the mauve and the jade. They've got a little bit of sparkle to them. So I'm just going to use the coral to darken up some of the face just a bit. So a little tip, if you haven't used particular colours or particular colours together before, test them on a piece of scrap paper first. That way, as you mix them with water, you'll know what strength the colour will be. Same thing, if you'd like to remove some of the colour, dry off your brush and just pull some of it up. This is also really good to use on the edges so you don't get really straight, harsh lines. Alright, so I'm just going to swap to a slightly smaller brush. Same kind of thing. This one is a size 5 and it's just a Winsor & Newton. This will just let me apply it a little bit more precisely. And again, I'm using the Karen's Coral. Now the look I'm going for in this particular face colour is really quite pale. So by adding all of these colours in such small amounts, we're going to keep that really pale face kind of quality, but it will be pretty and there will be soft, attractive colours. If you're looking for something really bold, this is not going to be it. Now, because Lindy's are not traditional watercolours, they don't lift quite as well as usual watercolour paints. So when you're trying to lift colours to lighten, you're not going to get quite the same results, but you can get something quite nice. Now I'm just going to put some of this Karen's Coral in the corner of the eyes here, because the eye is not dead white just there. I can see I've got a bit of a line here, so I'm just going to soften that slightly. So adding the colours that we have already gives a beautiful sort of like base layer, definitely Caucasian skin tone to the face. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is go in with this mauve. Really, really gently for some shadows. So this is really watered down quite a lot. To the point where there's hardly any colour in it. Just a hint, and you can see here that it really just is a hint of colour. Now if you'd like something darker, you can totally do that, but I tend to want to do that with the pencil afterwards, just because it gives me a bit more control. So right now I'm just adding sort of shadows. You can see how light that is, it's barely adding any colour. And again, to soften, going with either a wet brush or a clean sort of dried off brush. And just lighten up those colours. If you've lost too much of that sort of skin tone, go back in with the Karen's Coral. Now because I've watered these colours down so much, it's not going to give the traditional oomph from the Lindy's shimmer. It'll be quite subtle, but I'm hoping it kind of makes her skin look like it's glowing. That's the effect I'm going for. So again with the mauve, just in the shadow areas. Now because this is already wet, it will bleed a fair bit. If you'd like a little bit more control, just wait till it's dry and go in then. But I kind of want it to do exactly what it's doing. At this point, don't worry too much if you've been a little bit heavy-handed with the purple. There are ways to add some of those peachy tones back in. I'll show you in a minute. That might have been a bit much. Continue adding the Lara's Wild Mauve until you're happy with the sort of the depth of the colour. Add it wherever you think there might be sort of like some shading or shadow on the face. Okay, so I just want to lighten that up a bit. So I'm just going in with my larger brush, nice and clean. I've used a number 8 and a number 6 round brush to add the colour on the face here. If you've got smaller brushes, you can use those as well, but these seem to be working on this size. While I'm waiting for that little bit to dry, I'm going to add some of the Jana's Jade, or Jana's Jade, however you'd like to pronounce that. If it has a J, I say Jana in Australia, but it may be Jana. If your name is Jana, you can tell me how I should have pronounced that, Jana or Jana. So I've got the Jana's Jade, and I'm just going in right at the top of the eyes here. And I'm going to clean off my brush and drag the colour lower. But I haven't got any more colour on my brush, so it's just sort of bleeding from the darker to the light. Whoops, always do that. curse of shaky hands. It's always something that you've put out of place. Now while that's also doing its thing, I've got this beautiful pink that I've mixed from adding a little bit of purple with a little bit of coral and a little bit of azalea. And I'm just going to use that to add a tiny bit of colour to the lips as a starting point. Now, it is really the best idea to wait until the surrounding skin is dry before adding more colour to the lips, or else you get little bleeds like I've just done. If that happens, wipe it away with a paper towel. She begins. Just before I forget it, because I often do, a little bit of Karen's coral to the ear. Because I often forget the ears. Oops. Apparently a little bit of cat fur too. And I'm just adding a hint of the purple too. Now, I've been a little bit messy and I've got some bits that have escaped on the edges here. With what I'm about to do in the hair, that's not going to be an issue, but if you are doing something different, you might need to clean those up at this point. So before I get too excited about moving on with the face, I've now given it a quick dry. And I've got my little concoction of pinkish tones again, and of course that was the azalea, the coral and the mauve mixed together quite lightly. I'm just going to add another layer of this onto the lips and see if I can add some to the cheeks without making too much of a mess. No guarantees here, especially since I'm awesome at making a mess. So I've just added a little, and then I'm drying off my little brush here and then tapping at the edges. If I've done it okay, maybe not, because it's not watercolor paper and not watercolor. It should stop me getting these harsh lines. But sometimes you don't know until it's dry. Occasionally a rescue mission is needed, but I think that might be okay. Maybe a little bit more pink than I wanted, especially on each side, but that's okay. I can live with that. Now I'm just going to leave the eyes as they are, but I'm just going to add a tiny bit of this mauve into the whites, because the white of the eye isn't actually white. Now I'm kind of liking the rest of this. I've got some of the azalea now. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to do a slightly darker. I say that, but I start doing it anyway. So I'm just going to add a slightly darker line around the edge of the face here. And then clean off my brush and drag at that edge a little. Now, if you prefer a more dominant or pronounced shadow, then do not rework the edge to soften it. Just leave that line as it is, as you've applied it with the brush, and you'll get a much harder shadow, which is great if it's really bright light. Alright, now here's where I start to get brave. So I've got a little tiny bit of the Yana's Jade here. I'm just going to add a tiny amount into some of the shadows. Now make sure that you're adding small amounts of this in a very light wash as you go, because you can always go back and add more, but it's really hard to take some away. Being really careful not to overwhelm them if at all possible. But if you do, everything's fixable. Now I know that green is not your average colour for shadows, but I figure since it's night, it's a full moon, and it's kind of a witchy spooky scene, that I could get away with almost any colour in those shadows that I wanted to. So I thought that the green, since it's already in her eyes and it will be a little bit in the background, perhaps, I'm not sure yet, that I could add that into the shadows and it would help sort of bring a little harmony to the face. Now I'm extraordinarily glad that it worked out the way I hoped, because otherwise it could have been a little bit of a fix-it job. But I actually love the way it turned out. It's kind of got this grey, spooky-ish, a really sort of nighttime kind of quality to the shadows, and I love it. So I think I'm going to add some more exciting shadow colours into some of my future pieces of art. Now, because this is not watercolour paper, you'll just need to be slightly careful about overworking it. Alright, so at this point she's definitely got a bit more presence. She's got sort of glowing, luminous skin from the Lindys. I don't know if you can see the shimmer on screen. Maybe if I hold it right. So the eyes have got the most, but there's a little bit of shimmer in the skin and in other areas as well. Now, it's at this point I usually pick the journal up and hold it tilted slightly, just so I can take a look from a different angle, because sometimes things look strange, but you may not know it yet. So I've just got the leftover buff from my Jane Davenport on my palette over here. I'm just going to come in with a little of the buff to add some of that peachy colour back in some areas. Maybe just on the darker side of the face, because I don't want to overwork that pale side too much. Now you can really see how different that colour looks when I tilt the page, and that's because you're not getting the sort of semi-sheen from the water on the paper as I work. The reason I don't have it on an angle when I start off a piece is because sometimes the colour migrates down towards the lowest level, and it really needs to stay flat so that my colours are exactly where I want them to start with. At this point, because I'm sort of adding some of those peach tones back in, I can tilt the page up towards myself. Now this is not vertical at the moment, but it's probably about a 45-degree angle, and I can get a much better look at the colours. Seeing it from a different angle also helps notice any sort of oddities, like I can see my cheeks aren't even. I could be bothered by that, but honestly, I'm not. My cheeks in person aren't even either. So I'm just going with something that looks beautiful rather than perfect. At this particular point, I'm just using a nice clean brush with some water to soften and blend some of those colours. Now, I mentioned before, because Lindy's aren't watercolour, they cling to that paper a little bit more than a normal watercolour paint. So you're never going to be able to completely remove a colour by doing this, but you can lighten it, soften it and blend it, which is what I'm doing at the moment, because I really want that nose to be a little bit lighter than the rest of the face, because it's where that moonlight's hitting. Now it doesn't take much to make a big effect, and you can see just now, even by lightening some of those just small spots, I've got a bit more light and depth to my piece. Alright, she's definitely got a glow about her from those gorgeous Lindy's Magicals. If you would like to know a little bit more about Magicals, just click the link I have at the top of the screen at the moment, and there's a video that will show you all about Lindy's Magicals in case you would like to know a little bit more. These gorgeous powdered pigments are one of my great favourite crafting supplies. They're so versatile. Anyway, as you can see, they have allowed us to get a beautiful base colour to that face. It has a little bit of glowy shimmer. Not all magicals have shimmer, in case that's not what you're after, but I love it, especially for this particular image. It's just got that magical quality that it adds. Magicals. Yes, that was dodgy, sorry. I love the softness of the colours. You could, of course, have made this much stronger, but I love the way it is. I'm now going to use one of the new Lindy's Magical Glitz powders, and it's called Snazzy Sparkle. And I'm just going to use that to add some beautiful shimmer to the moon on her face and in the sky. Now I'm mixing this one up really thick, so it's taking a little bit of work to apply it because it's sort of like a paste, but it looks beautiful. Now I've got more of those gorgeous magicals that I've mixed up for the hair. This one is Gag Me With a Spoon Grey, I know, odd name. And the black is Toto's Tornado Black. Now, the black doesn't actually have sparkles, so you could use any black watercolor paint for this. As you can see, I'm just mixing a little bit of it with the grey, so I get a beautiful graded colour for the hair. I want it to look smoky and mysterious and ethereal. Now, you could absolutely leave the hair like this, but I know that's not what I'm doing. You can see how beautiful that looks as both a colour and with the shimmer in there. It just gives something extra to that image and that particular art journal page. And I'm really loving how this looks. I can't wait to show you what it looks like when it's finished. If what's in my head comes out on the paper, this should be fantastic. Now, you need to wait till it's completely dry, and I mean completely dry, a couple of hours at least, before starting work with the pencils. So I have a beautiful black pencil here that I'm using just to add some outlines. Now, you choose to use coloured pencils for this, but I wanted something really dark to stand up against the black stamping on the hair. So I needed to go a little bit bold on my face colour choices. I'm using a little bit of blue and some turquoise in the eyes, and blue in some of the shadows as well, just because I love sort of mixing up the shadow colours now that I've started. To enhance those eyebrows, use a darker blue, and again with the black. A little black on the inside of the lips, enhanced with some darker red tones, and then make some textural marks on the lips to give them a little bit of roundness and a little bit of shape. I'm using that white pencil to put the underlying colour down, and then this beautiful terracotta coloured pencil to add a tiny bit of shading to the hair and the nose. Now this turned out to be a little bit more colour than I wanted, so I've gone over that with one of Jane Davenport's Skin Colour face paint markers. Avoid that terracotta colour, or perhaps just not be quite as heavy-handed as I was. It was a bit much. So the paint markers are the last step. You can use these to help blend colours together, add some highlights, or even a bit of depth back in there. Now, I use paint markers quite, I love putting my hands on things. So I add paint to the piece and then I wipe it around with my finger. This is not the most precise way to do things, but I do love the soft sort of look that it gives the piece that you're working on. I've used a white Posca marker just to add some highlights back in, and again, wipe it around with your finger, or if you want them to be quite crisp, just leave it there. And then a black Posca marker for the eyes, just to make the eyes really pop. Now, the eyelashes are still the thing I hate doing the most because they are never the same, but I do them anyway. I use that same black Posca marker to outline some of the hair around the face, and then I'm just adding a bit more of that black pencil. Now, as you can see, the eyes still don't look quite right, and it's because I haven't added the shadows in there yet. There needs to be a little shadow just underneath that top lid on the eye to make it look less flat, and it's amazing exactly how much oomph this can give to the eyes. Adding in those little white shine into the pupils, also you can see how that is really making a difference. Now this is all just pencil and those few paint markers just to give the final oomph to the piece. And this is it now that it's finished. It's got Lindy's sprayed onto some paper with some beautiful flocking. The background is done with just a single stamp pad and some of the same pencils I've been using. And again, more of that smudging of paint markers with my finger for that beautiful misty look. And when you put it all together, the beautiful watercoloring, the gorgeous background, the scenic hair, it gives a real drama to the page. And this is actually the color it is. You've got that gorgeous shimmer, and when you tilt it, you sort of get that darker look. It is really pretty. I have loved the way that this has turned out. This might be my favourite piece to date. I love the colour of the skin, I love the stamped hair, and I love how it's all come together. I so hope you love it as much as I do. If you do, please subscribe to my channel to see more, and make sure you click the notification bell, and please give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. It is really nice to know what you're interested in and if you'd like to know more. So sending you all big hugs for Halloween, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye.